Good afternoon. It's another week 19, right?
Yes, 19.
Pushing forward. We're reading through the Bible in a year. We're plowing into some very hard topics when it comes into the Old Testament this week. But before we get too much into it, what do we got to read?
This week we have Psalms 55 to 57, John chapter 5 through 8, and then Judges chapter 11 through 21, which gets to the end of the book, and then Ruth, the whole book, 1 through 4.
Judges and Ruth. And so that's what we'll talk about today is the book of Judges.
And a little bit of Ruth.
And a little bit of Ruth. Hopefully
Ruth takes place during the Judges, so
yeah, and
she fits in.
It forms a good, I did this in Bible class yesterday. We got to Ruth within like the last 5 minutes, which I always feel bad. Ruth gets sidelined. There's a lot to go off of in the book of Ruth, which we have a great resource. It's between us and our Bibles today. It's in our church library, so take a look.
It's a really good book. It actually goes, I have a copy of it and I've read it. It goes chapter by chapter and almost verse by verse through the whole book of Ruth, which is only 4 chapters, the book. Right. But it's actually, I learned a lot from it. It gets into a bit of even Psalm 31 woman and stuff like that, and there's a lot of Jesus in Ruth.
Woman of character or something like that, which is the Psalm 31 woman. Yeah. It's Elizabeth there. She's the author. Because I've read some of it, I haven't read all of it actually. But I have a commentary there, the Concordia commentary, and she based a lot of that off of the study on that. So it's really good because most people usually will take it as like a lovey-dovey kind of like tale and things like that. But the literary elements of the book of Ruth is just fantastic. It's woven perfectly.
Yeah, there's a lot of Old Testament themes that we've already seen show up. The idea of like the remnant and Israel, and again, the Savior, and because I think Ruth is kind of a Christ-like figure, and Boaz is a Christ-like figure.
Right.
It's very interesting.
And of course, into their family is woven into David, which then comes Christ. I like because I could see me forget this before the end of the video if we don't get to Ruth in time. But I love how at the beginning of the book you do have where, there's a terrible situation. There's Naomi goes down to Moab with her, sons and her husband. They all die. She has the 2 daughters-in-laws now, and Ruth rewards her with an act of extreme loyalty, which is kind of like how the fortunes begin to turn in the book. And at the end, Boaz shows an act of extreme loyalty towards Ruth and Naomi too, which then allows for all the reversal of the terrible events of the death and the tragedy and the plague and the famine to be reversed at the end of the book. And so you see how this points to God and his extreme loyalty, that even when we are faithless, like during the time of the Judges, he remains faithful. He can't deny himself. Now God's loyalty was actually going to fix and reverse all of the circumstances.
Well, when you realize that this takes place during Judges, and Judges is lots of terrible stuff happens in Judges.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, there's actually, God is still working, our salvation, even despite all these terrible things going on.
So Ruth is a good way for us to kind of keep in mind that even when we see our world in complete disarray and falling into evil, into sin, that God is still kind of working out his ends and salvation. So a beautiful narrative, and if we get more to say about it, we will, but it does take place during this really awful time. The book of Judges in college, when I was going through Old Testament timeline, the Judges is called the Dark Ages of Israel's history. And it's if you want like a summary of the book of Judges, it's how the Israelites stop being the Israelites and become the Canaanites. They adopt all of their worship practices.
They're almost worse than the Canaanites.
They amp up what the Canaanites did. And up until this point, you had Moses, you had Joshua, who have told them, you go into this promised land, here's the people God's called you to be, but if you forsake his covenant and become like the Canaanites, well, then God's going to treat you the same way that he's going to treat the Canaanites. So you do kind of have a concern at the end of the book, especially in Judges. You're like, okay, well, we know what was going to happen if they did this, and now they've done it. What's God going to do? Which, Ruth is partly a response, but you do see how, God will enact judgment, too, on what's happened. So what sticks out to you about Judges is you kind of read it, anything that kind of, hit you.
Well, none of its leaders during, Judges are very good leaders. I mean, we've gotten used to, like you said, like Moses or Abraham, where they had their flaws and they sinned and stuff, but they seemed a lot more upright than a lot of these people, and I mean they do get progressively worse as we get through here.
And that's, when we read the Bible, usually we think that, these are like really good moral characters. Like when we read Samson or Jephthah or, any of these characters, like, these are people we should emulate and things like that. And no, they're not supposed to be. These are the whole point of this book of Judges is to make us realize these people are absolutely horrible. Yeah. And God, yet he's going to work with them and through them. It doesn't mean he condones much or any of what they end up doing. But it's kind of like God goes to work and he has all these broken tools, and this is what he has to work. So he'll work with it, but he's also got to deal with these broken tools too.
Well, it's kind of back to we talked about this, I think, one of the first weeks, the prescriptive versus descriptive in the Bible. Prescriptive is when God says, do this or don't do this. Descriptive is just, this is what happened.
Yep.
And Judges is very
descriptive.
This is what actually happened. This is history. Yeah. This is how God worked through, the Israelites. But this isn't like, you should, cut up your concubine and send it to Israel.
Go and do likewise.
No, don't do it.
And if you are paying close attention to like how the book is, you can read it too. Whenever God does show up there, he's kind of like, guys, what are you doing? Like, he's like, this is exactly what I told you not to do. So when God does show up in the narrative, he's very angry at his people because of what they are becoming, who they are becoming. And so he always will send people to say, come back, stop doing this. And so with that in mind, perhaps we'll dig into the narrative here. So it picks up chapter 1 with the book of Joshua, right? Remember that, kind of get our head on straight. They've been brought into the promised land, finally. Joshua, they conquer some of the Canaanite tribes and things like that. And at the end of the book of Joshua, he has distributed the inheritance and tells them, go to your lands. If you have more to conquer, finish the job. Take possession of what God has given to us. All that God has said he has done. So, now go and live and dwell in the land. Well, at the beginning of the book of Joshua, we get kind of some early successes still, because Joshua's kind of still in the picture at the chapter 1 here.
Chapter 1's a little bit almost like prequel to Judges.
It is. Yeah. It kind of sets the stage, as it were.
It's like, they drive out whoever they drive out here in the first part, and then then it's slowly like, all of a sudden it's, the people of Benjamin did drive out the Jebusites, and, then you get into the, Manasseh did not drive out this person, Ephraim didn't drive out these guys, Zebulun didn't drive out these guys, Asher, Naphtali.
Right.
And the Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, so this is going horribly wrong.
Right. And here we got a couple of interesting things, and I mentioned this to you too, that the book of Judges has an inclusio. We can see just how far things have turned. At the beginning of the book here, we have God saying to the tribe of Judah, go up and I'm going to give you the land. And they go and they do it. At the end of the book, they go to civil war with the Benjaminites. And God tells Judah, you're the one that's going to go up, but they fail 2 times before God eventually allows them to succeed. So we do see like this kind of change in the people of God in the narrative of the book of Judges here too. So and then of course we get a mention. This is kind of interesting. If you're paying attention here, chapter 1 verse 16, the descendants of Kenite, Moses' father-in-law. And so you get Moses' relatives, or at least, maybe not his blood relatives, but, who he married into. They're also kind of in the land, and they become kind of a thorn, too, later on in the book, as well as characters in it. You get a mention of Moses' family still. You get mention of Caleb and Joshua and their family, because actually the first judge is Caleb's younger brother, Othniel, which is kind of, if you're the first judge, you go off the, who is this guy? But he's actually connected to the larger story too, and he's related. So we get kind of this picking up the threads with, here's the next generation, picking up, the story, and here's what happens to them. So chapter 1, you have, some success, but then all of a sudden, tribe after tribe didn't do this, and didn't do that, didn't do this, they didn't conquer. They failed to, live up to their end of the covenant deal here. Because
what is it in chapter 2, about the covenant? God said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land, which we know they did that. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. So they're not doing what God is telling them to do, and so they're making covenants with people in the land, and they also are failing to get rid of the gods of the people of the land.
Yeah. And if you remember, this is interesting here too. The chapter 2 that starts off with the angel of the Lord, which this is the pre-incarnate Jesus here, went up from Gilgal, which is where they crossed the river Jordan when they first came into the Promised Land. But what's interesting, it seems like this angel of the Lord kind of is stationed in Gilgal. Like he's almost like there, maybe constantly, at least a presence there.
Is that where the ark is?
Yeah. When they first crossed over, and then it goes the Bokiam here, which means people who weep, those who weep. And tells them, hey, you guys, here's the covenant deal. You guys haven't done this. In fact, now you're forsaking the covenant. So guess what? I'm not going to drive out these people anymore, right? They're just going to be thorns in your side. Which is, this, I had a thought, I can't remember it right now, but as I was reading it this week, and I was kind of like, this idea of this thorn in their side comes up a lot, especially New Testament. Paul talked about the thorn in his side. And so God here has these Canaanites being a thorn in the people of Israel's side that's going to lead them astray. And of course, as soon as the angel Lord tells that, they all start weeping, and they call that place the place of weeping.
Is there an idea that maybe the Israelites were getting a bit prideful, maybe,
Probably.
About how, all these, we're defeating all these people and starting to think that maybe it's them and forgetting, it's because of God that they're winning.
Right. And as we'll see when we get to the end of the book with the tribe of Dan, this private army goes out, and not only are they prideful, but very bloodlusting too. And so maybe they start seeing this conquest unhealthily as well, that, hey, we're here just to demolish and destroy everyone. And so they kind of take an unhealthy view towards what God has given them in the land too. And we'll see that with the tribe of Dan, unfortunately, as well. So this Israel's disobedience, Israel's unfaithfulness, combined with the death of Joshua and the people who lived with Joshua, really produces a really bad mix of a very bad cauldron pot here. It leads the people into apostasy. They start worshiping other gods. They become just like the Canaanites, whom they just were told to drive out from the land. And so the end of chapter 2 kind of sets up how we read the book of Judges. So chapter 2 is like, all right, here's what you're going to read now, and here's how you should read it. And so there's a cycle. There's 5 things in the book of Judges that happens with each of the 6 major judges. There's first the apostasy. So the people commit grave sin. They forsake God. They follow their gods. They sacrifice their children. They are practicing crooked ways. You name it. And so because of that, God then sells his people into oppression, into slavery with somebody. The Moabites, foreign tribes, foreign power that comes in and subjugates them for some odd number of years. And then after that, this humbles them, and it makes them realize, we forsook God. That's why this happened. We've gone astray. And so this brings them to cry out to God. God hears their cry, and he brings up a judge. Someone who's going to rescue them. And, we think of judges, we're thinking gavel, hammer pounding, making laws and whatnot.
Judge is just kind of a leader in this situation.
In fact, kind of a military leader. Of course, they would, during times of peace, you would go visit the judge and he would decide cases.
So that was set up, Moses did that. Where, his father-in-law said, you should get people to help you with this.
Yeah. So this has roots already in Moses. So when Moses does that, it's kind of setting up what the judges will soon be.
Sorry.
Uh-oh. Knocked us down.
Bumped the table.
There we go. Turn us back here. There we go.
Sorry about that.
Good. I was precariously perched, so yeah. But yeah, then, finally after God raises the judge, number 4, the 5th and final element is that the judge brings peace, sometimes, to the land. And so when we read each of the 6 major judges, we'll see the same theme play out. The same verses are said again and again because it's trying to get us to see the pattern that God is pushing himself through. And each time we go through the pattern, each judge gets worse and worse and worse.
Sort of going downward slope, a little bit up, and then not enough up to counteract
get you back going. Yeah. And so just and we'll go through, when we talk about each of the judges, there's something about each judge that is not good, or at least that tells us that things around are not good. So chapter 2 sets this all up. Here's what God is saying, and then finally we get into the period of the judges themselves. So the rest of the book of Judges from chapter 3 through 16 tells us of 6 major judges and also 6 minor judges. 6 minor because there's maybe like a verse about them. So there's not much about them that we know of besides who they were and
maybe one act they did.
Right, one major thing that they did. But there are 6 major judges, and the first major judge is Othniel, who we already mentioned, and he is the younger brother of Caleb. And anything that you kind of knows about him or who he is or what he did? It's pretty simple.
He went out to war.
Yeah. Really, this first judge sets up that very cycle that I just told you. Verse 7 says Israel did what was evil. They forgot the God of their fathers, and therefore God gives them up into the hand of someone else, and they serve them for 8 years. And then the people, verse 9, the people cry out to God, and so God raises up for them a judge who will save them. And then we're told that he delivers them and brings peace, and that the land has rest for 40 years.
So each of these judges is almost like a cycle of like Exodus replaying itself a little bit.
Yeah.
I think you're the one who pointed this verse out to me in chapter 2, verse 10. That there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, and that's similar to the language in Exodus,
verse by verse,
where there's arose a new Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph.
Yeah,
I was gonna say Joshua. I'm like, too many J's. I cannot do names today for some reason. So this is gonna be fun. There's a lot of names in this one.
Right.
But so it's like this is almost like Exodus playing itself out in a small version where the people cry out, God saves them, and they're good for a while, and then they screw up again.
Right. So a vicious cycle that's being, and you can almost kind of tell as this cycle's going on that something needs to change to break this cycle. And at the end of the book of Judges, we'll find out that there needs to be a king in Israel, which will lead us to David. It also tells us they don't have God as their king.
Yeah. Because the human kings aren't end up going through the same pattern as the Jewish judges. So that's not, they don't need any king, they need the king.
Right. Yeah.
But we'll get to there.
Which gets us to Jesus, because Jesus is both the human and divine king. Like, he kind of wraps it all up perfectly. He's also the judge. He is also the judge, yeah. The one who will save his people from their sins and deliver and even settle things. You bet. So you get Othniel here, and it gives us a brief summary of who he is, what he did, sets the stage for how we read about the rest of the judges. Is the first example. And then there's the next guy, and his name's Ehud. And he's actually my favorite judge.
He's left-handed.
I am left-handed. And
what did you say about left-handed people?
They're suspicious. They're suspect. Up until even a couple generations ago, right? What did they do in the schoolrooms? They tied hands behind back.
With your right hand.
Beat, if you use your left hand, you got beat, which is probably why a lot of left-handers have schizophrenic behaviors and things like that. Not bitter.
Because left-handed people aren't common. So, I mean, there's nothing really wrong with left-handed people. No. It's just they're not common enough for people to... Yeah. Anything out of the ordinary, people...
This is kind of weird. And Ehud is weird because he's... his very description, right? So, to set the stage again, Israel does what's evil. So God sells them into the hand of the king of Moab, which, remember, Ruth is a Moabite. And so they serve them for a certain amount of years. Was it 18 years that the people of Israel are subjugated to Moab? So the people cry out, and so God raises up for them a deliverer, a judge, Ehud, the son of Gera, a Benjaminite, which, do you remember what the name Benjamin means? Top of your head?
Isn't it something like deceitful or no?
No, it's Benjamin, son of my right hand.
That's it.
And so Benjamin means son of my right hand, but he's a left-hander. So that tells us he's a little bit character-wise suspect. He's a left-handed man in a right-handed tribe. Which at the end of the book, there's the Benjaminites when they go to civil war. There's 700 left-handed slingers who can't miss a shot, which tells you that this is not a good. They're accurate, but they're also not good because they're left-handers in a right-handed tribe. Anyway, Ehud, he's suspect, and what does this allow him to do in terms of giving victory to Israel? Because he's left-handed, it actually plays into the story.
I don't remember this. Well, he presented a tribute to the king of Moab.
Yeah, so he's sneaky. He's diabolical. Right, the Aramaic word for left-handed is also one for devil. But if you think about swords, if you were a right-handed person...
because he straps it to his right side instead of his left side because he pulls from
Right.
However it worked.
The scabbard there.
It's on the wrong side.
Yeah, because, if you guys are right-handed, I'll stand up, right? So if you have a sword, right, you put it right here, and then you draw it like that. Well, if you're a left-hander, you're going to draw it from the other side.
Yeah.
And so when he comes into the court, right, he's going to meet the king here, Eglon, and he comes up, they would come and search him for a weapon. Well, they're going to check right here, and he doesn't have a weapon. We're good. He's good. He passes inspection. So not knowing that his weapon's actually on this side. And so he goes in and he walks up to the king. I have a message for you. Everyone kind of clears out, right? The doors are shut. And he walks up to him and takes it was probably like a knife like this like a dagger.
Not a pleasant story.
No, it's not. And Eglon's apparently a very big, heavy-set man. And so Ehud drives the dagger right into his gut. And it's he's so kind of pudgy right there that the knife goes all the way in. The fat kind of closes around it, and it comes out the other end. So it's just kind of a visceral image, but that tells you about the Book of Judges is too.
Well, then he goes into the bathroom, basically.
Yeah, and his men think, he's relieving himself. He's using the restroom. Maybe there's even a Sixth Commandment interplay going on with that thought too. And then it comes to the point they're like, okay, he's been in there a really long time. We need to go check on him, and they go in and he's dead. Which allows Ehud to escape and rally the army and bring about a victory. But once again, pretty good judge. So Ehud's pretty in terms of faithful. We don't get any really major character flaws, except he's a little bit deceitful because he's left-handed. So it kind of sets that stage. So there's the first judge. And then we get a minor judge, Shamgar.
Yeah, like Shamgar.
I love Shamgar.
Kills 600 Philistines with an ox goad.
Yeah, if you could just have one verse in the Bible, right? This is the kind of verse you'd want, right? That here's who I am. I did this, and I saved Israel. Woo.
Yeah, there we go.
An ox goad, right? That's kind of a farming tool that you'd use to drive like oxen. So it's kind of a pointy stick. That's kind of his tool for defeating the Philistines.
Then we get into Deborah, which is the only female judge.
Right. And Deborah, she's very faithful. In fact, she's so faithful, it makes you wonder what in the world is wrong with the men in this narrative. And that's kind of, like I said, each judge has kind of something about them that's can be suspect, but also something's wrong.
Because the men as head are supposed to be the ones who are leading the military. Shouldn't they? They're supposed to be protecting the women. Not the women aren't the ones supposed to be going off to war.
Yeah, and so when you get
not that women can't go off to war, but they shouldn't have to.
Yeah. So this sets up. We understand. A man is head and supposed to take care of matters, especially like matters like this. And so when you read this, you're like, wow, things are so bad in Israel that there's not a man who can do this, because they're all cowards and they're spineless. And and this actually sets it up. When you read the book Judges here in chapter 4 of Deborah, you're kind of like, wow, the men are really spineless. These are not like men you look up to.
Even Barak won't go up to war without Deborah coming along. It's like, really?
Imagine that, dragging saying, hey, Rebecca, like, hey, honey, I really don't want to go to war unless you come with me. You want to come? It's like, who does that? So it kind of tells you his character. Yeah, what are you going to say there?
No, that's just, I was thinking that if you told Rebecca that.
Right. You want to come to war with me, honey? I'm really scared. I don't really want to go unless you... So you're kind of like, wow. So when we read Deborah, right, what we should be reading is, wow, things are so bad in Israel that a woman has to take charge here. Because there's no men to do it.
But she does a pretty good job.
She does do a good job. And when women have to do it, they will do it. And I love what she does, because she calls Barak here to come to him, and this is at verse 6, Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go gather men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun? So she has to so God has come to Barak at some point and said, hey, I'm going to raise you up, go and save my people. And then
Barak
he doesn't.
Maybe should have been the judge.
Yeah, Barak maybe should have been the judge. But instead he just kind of sits there and doesn't do anything. And so Deborah has to call him and say, dude, God told you to go do this. Man up and go get it done. And, of course, he says to her, well, I'll go, but only if you go with me. Or just like, oh, man, this guy is a spineless coward here. And then that tells, Deborah says, sure, I'll go with you. And okay, I'll hold your back, and pat you when you need to be. But nevertheless, the road, verse 9, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera, the enemy general, into the hand of a woman. So, like, a woman's going to get the glory here, not you. So this, as my professor at SEM said, this is not a story that Barak's going to go to the bar and say, hey, guys, I had a great military victory. Let me tell you the story. It'll be more like them saying, hey, how'd that battle go? Like, well, kind of he's embarrassed to say it because he didn't man up to take care of business.
Yeah, because it's Jael, the wife of Heber.
Yeah, which is a Kenite, Moses' family. Father-in-law, but yeah,
she's the one who actually, because Sisera flees, and then ends up in the tent of Jael, and she's like, basically is like, oh yeah, I'll hide you, and then ends up driving a tent stake through his head.
Yeah, talk about another visceral kind of, and the fact that a woman has to do this too.
There's a painting that I had to learn in art history of this scene.
Did you?
It's really great because it's I don't remember how to say it, but anyway, it's like this really where it was this period where there was like the paintings were like really dark, but then there'd be really really good contrast in these paintings. I should have looked that up before this, but it's a really good painting.
Interesting. Yeah, and so that that image alone here, the enemy general flees, hides, the woman hides him and then covers him with a blanket. I love that. Like, don't worry, you just sleep right there. Gives him even milk. Talk about like a little baby here. She's like tucking him in, giving him a bottle of milk. He goes off to sleep, and while she's sleeping, then just takes the tent peg and just boom, just like, oh man, and kills him. And of course, then they find oh, here he is. So Jael here, she wins the battle for Israel. She subdues him and gets the glory. Chapter 5 is a song that Deborah and Barak sing here, which really just retells what happened.
Shamgar is mentioned again.
Shamgar is mentioned.
Where we actually find
Yeah. And this kind of retells the story, even out of the window, like Sisera's wife, is looking out and saying, "Oh, wonder why he hasn't come back yet." It's because he's dead.
I really like it when there's songs listed out in the Bible because it does show you that the song should tell the story kind of thing. I mean, a good like hymn or something should you lay it out, you tell the story, you can learn the story from the song. And,
right.
Yeah.
And then of course, may all your enemies perish, O Lord, but your friends be like the sun that as he rises in his might. And then we're told at the end of chapter 5, the land had rest for 40 years. So the land is given peace because of Deborah, coaching the men how to actually be men and take care of business, and things like that. So thanks be to God for Deborah. And then pushing on, we get once again chapter 6. The people of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord.
I think chapter 6 is when I think this book says Ruth might have taken place during this time because there's the famine and everything with their crops. And,
that's a good point.
Anyway, that's just side note. That's we don't really know exactly when it happened, but this is a possibility.
Oh, another thing about the book of Ruth, a good literary pun here is that the word Bethlehem means house of bread, but there's a famine, so the house of bread has no bread. And Ruth chapter 1. So I just kind of love, kind of the interplay. It's a good, literary device. But back in chapter 6 then, we have the famine. We have the Midianites who rise up. God allows them to rise up and oppress his own people again. The Israelites are crying out to God. And this time we kind of get a break here. We've had 3 major judges here. So we're halfway through the book. Approximately with the judges telling the story.
And now we get a prophet.
And a prophet. This is probably one of the first times a prophet is mentioned in the Old Testament. And we don't know his name, but we do know that God tells him to go and say to the people, once again, it's that covenant language, I brought you up out of Egypt. I gave you this good land, and yet you have not been my people. You keep falling away. Things keep getting worse. You've not obeyed my voice. And therefore, this is why you're being oppressed. But God yet, because he is true to who he is, when he hears his people crying out to him, he can't help but save. And so we're told that the angel of the Lord comes and sits under an oak tree, a terebinth, and meets with Gideon, who is hiding out because, they're trying to keep their food hidden so that way they don't get found out and the food get taken. And the Lord kind of has a conversation with them. And what do you notice about the conversation with Gideon? Who do you see Gideon being? What kind of character traits does he have? At least especially early on.
Well, he thinks he's weak.
Right. So he's kind of a little timid.
Yeah. That makes me think a little bit like Moses. Moses didn't want to go out and be God's prophet.
Right. Kind of makes excuses, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to do it. I'm too weak,
Yeah.
I do enjoy when God is talking with him. And, he says, "You are a mighty man of valor." And Gideon says, "Well, then if the Lord is with us, then why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us? Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us. He's given us into the hand of Midian." And then the Lord has turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours, and I will save your people. Did I not send you?" But then Gideon kind of makes a couple more excuses and things like that. We are told that, and a little bit about Gideon, is that he's told to cut down the Asherah, kind of like the totem pole in town that kind of is for the gods. And of course, when does he do it?
In the middle of the night.
Middle of the night, 'cause he's afraid of doing it in the day. This reminded me, Saint Boniface.
Is he the one who cut down the giant oak tree?
Yeah, he's the one
in the Germans. I saw that recently.
I think, some article I recently read too. So Saint Boniface in Germany, went to convert the Germans, and they worshiped this giant tree, and so
he went and cut the tree down.
He went and cut the tree down and then took the tree and made a church building out of it, and said, "Go worship God in that now." And they did, and they converted to Christianity. So when I see this, I kind of have that reminiscent, like, oh yeah, it's just kind of like what Saint Boniface did. And so he cuts it down. The people in the town get mad because he's cut down their idol.
And he's given a new name.
He's given a new name. It was Jerub-Baal.
Yeah, let Baal contend. How do you say it? Is it Baal?
Baal, so whatever you want to say.
Let him contend with him.
Baal.
Because he broke down his altar.
Yeah, and so this becomes, he has a kind of a mark against him here, you want to say, from his enemies. Then he asks for 2 signs, because he's still in doubt.
Sign of the fleece.
Yeah. What's the sign of the fleece there?
Was it the first night? It's if he lays the fleece of wool out, and if there's dew on the fleece alone and it's dry on all the ground. And then the second night, it's if there's dew on the ground but the fleece is dry.
Yeah.
Is the 2 signs, and God does both of them.
Yeah. Which tells you, one, God is patient, but yet it tells us also Gideon, he's kind of timid. He's not very bold because he doesn't do this during the day when he cut down the pole. And then when he's told, "Go out and I'll deliver the people here," he's kind of like, "Well, give me a couple signs and then I'll believe that you'll do this." God does grant it.
Well, he already had the whole thing with the sacrifice too, and where the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of his staff, and the meat and unleavened cakes, fire sprang up, which does kind of harken back to Moses too, the burning bush thing,
Right.
He requires more signs and all that, which also, again, the angel of the Lord, it's probably Jesus, because he says, I've seen, he freaks out because he's seen the angel of the Lord face to face, and, why would he freak out? I guess people freak out about angels, but then he freaks out afterwards. It's like when he realizes who it is.
Yeah, and it's either here, it might be when Samson.
I think that's Samson. You're probably whatever. If you're thinking what I'm thinking, you're thinking.
And he literally ascends.
Yeah.
Like he goes up and like Jesus does, he ascends.
I think that's Samson. We'll get to there.
Yeah. So finally, Gideon, he has his signs. God has encouraged him time and time again, because he's kind of cowardly, to go out and do this. And so we're told that he has an army of 22,000, people. 32,000 people. Thank you. And God says that's too many.
Yeah.
And so how does God kind of whittle it down a bit?
First, it's whoever's fearful and trembling gets sent home, and that's 2/3 of the army.
That's bad.
And then they go to the water, and whoever laps
like a
water
dog.
like a dog
stays.
Yeah, so it's only 300 who are, or whatever way it is. There's 300 people left basically after that.
And I kind of love the image of this, because you think of if you were going to go down to the water and drink, right? You kind of have you go down and you drink it like that, and that's who God says send those people home. Here's who you got left. You got people who rush down to the river and just fall on their hands and dive their face in.
We're having issues with this today.
And dive their face in. Let me stack this back up.
Vertigo or anything from watching this.
Yeah, a more stable thing to put this on. But I love kind of the image of them, the people falling. You can think of crazy people in movies, and they're drinking water out of the river. That's who God says, there's my army. I'll take that. And so he gets 300, right? You want to think of like the movie 300 or like the Spartan Battle of Thermopylae when these 300. Well, here's God's 300 right here. And what's kind of the battle plan? I always kind of love it.
This is the one where they basically sneak down and break the fire, or they have the torches in the jars and they break them, and they basically kind of make them seem like maybe it's a bigger army attacking them than it actually is.
Yeah. And once again, Gideon needs another sign. So he has them, go down into the camp and listen to the troops in the camp talk. And he overhears someone saying, well, I had a dream that, we got beaten in battle, and this is Gideon coming. So everyone is fearful on the enemy side here too. And so, the plan is take your jars, smash them, and start waving torches and hooting and hollering, and it freaks them all out. And so they all think, the enemy's in the camp, and then they slaughter each other. And so God wins the battle by causing confusion amongst the enemy. And then, of course, but then Gideon, after this, kind of, his character becomes sour, too. So he's timid, he's kind of, afraid. But he also has quite a temper. That we discover in chapter 8. There's a couple of groups that he gets really upset with.
They won't help his army, basically.
Yeah, they won't nourish him. They're traveling through, and they said, nope, we're not going to help out. And he comes back through and he'll kill them. They're even Israelites. So these are Israelites that he does this to. And so, we kind of get a thought with Gideon that he's kind of bloodlust too. He has a temper. He'll kill just because you get him grumpy. He'll retaliate against you. And so, kind of we see some character flaws here. You kind of a turn here. This is not as good of a judge as Deborah or Ehud or Othniel. And then even worse is that Gideon causes the people to sin.
Yeah, he makes an idol.
Yeah, and it reads just like Aaron and the golden calf, where, he's like, hey, give me your gold, and they give him the earrings and whatnot, and he fashions it into an ephod, kind of like this beautiful linen, puts it on an idol, and they start worshiping, this God, and so we're told that it becomes all Israel goes after the word is they hoard after it, and it becomes a snare to Gideon and his family.
I'd say because it's sons, then.
Yep. And
that's not a good one either.
The Abimelech. So Gideon has 70 sons.
Yeah.
And
Abimelech kills them all.
Abimelech kills them all.
One.
Abimelech is called the anti-judge, kind of like you have the Antichrist.
Yeah.
He is the anti-judge. In fact, this is Israel's first unauthorized stab at a king, because he makes himself a king. And in fact, we're told that he doesn't serve 3 years, but in chapter 9, verse 22, he rules over Israel 3 years. So it's given that same dominion term as a king. So this is really, he's not a good guy either. He, like I said, he murders his 70 brothers because he sees them as competition. He kind of also threatens other people in places, Shechem. And one of the brothers does survive and calls out a curse, which is fulfilled at the end of the chapter. And eventually Abimelech, he goes to war with the people in Shechem, and then a certain woman has like a big stone and throws it down, and it clunks him on the head, and he dies. He tells his armor bearer, right? I love that. Draw your sword and kill me, lest they say a woman killed him.
Isn't it later?
David, Bathsheba. Yeah.
Well, Abimelech is mentioned. That story is mentioned later, where it's like, and he was killed by a woman. So this didn't work.
Yeah, I do believe that is when David is saying, like, if he says, "Oh, don't you remember what happened to Abimelech in the days when the woman killed?" Yeah. But it might be another time too where that's brought up.
But I know it's brought up somewhere else where it's. Yeah, I find that funny.
Yeah. So that thus ends Abimelech, but also tragically, it also kind of is the end of Gideon's legacy. So Gideon's legacy, with him saving the people of Israel, also becomes sour because of his children and the unfaithfulness that results because of their actions. So it's kind of tragic. It's unfortunate. So because we can see the judges are getting worse. Chapter 10, you have some minor judges, Tola and Jair, who are mentioned here. Just very briefly, we're told of further disobedience and oppression in verse 6 of chapter 10, that they did what was evil, and so God kind of gives them up. God once again, says, guys, once again, here's the reason why I'm doing this, and they're not catching this. And eventually they still cry out, well, yes, we'll still cry out to you. And God decides, I'll raise up another deliverer. But this deliverer is, so far, he's the worst one that will come happen here. Jephthah. And what do you notice about Jephthah in chapter 11?
I'm trying to remember.
Pretty much, he's kind of like if Israel's mafia, in a sense. He's a thug. He's kind of a warlord. We're told...
he's the one who makes that vow.
Yes.
Yeah,
it just, just kind of creepy here. When we're told he's the son of a prostitute, and so he's, his brothers pretty much say, you don't belong with us, so get out of here. And we're told he goes and lives in the hill country, and he collects around him worthless fellows. So this is kind of like a gang. Jephthah forms a gang. And he's kind of like the leader of this gang. So, not a good thing at all. And in fact, things are so bad, though, that the elders of the city go to Jephthah and say, can you help us? So they go to this gang leader and this kind of thug and say, you save us. Which tells you it's not good. Yeah, never a good idea. So Jephthah, he kind of, goes, he makes a witness. He gives reason why he's going to go fight these people. And then he actually does go out and he wins the battle. It brings victory, deliverance, but we're told of this tragic vow that he makes.
Yeah,
And what does he vow here?
Which I don't understand why he would make this vow in the first place.
Right.
Basically, if the Lord would give the Ammonites into his hand, then whatever comes out from the door of his house to meet him when he returns will be the Lord's. It's like, what else is going to come out of your house first except someone in your family?
Yeah.
So his daughter comes out, we're told. Which it's kind of unclear whether he actually goes and sacrifices her or if she's just given to work,
right.
Because it emphasizes that she'll never marry.
Right.
And so it almost seems like maybe that she wasn't killed, but that she was, gone to work, I would say the temple, but the temple doesn't exist at that time. But
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're told about verse 39 at the end of 2 months, because she says, let me go off in the mountains and mourn for a couple of months here. And he's like, go ahead. And she does. And then we're told she returns, and her father did with her all according to his vow that he had made. So if it is a sacrifice, it's tragic. It shows us that the Lord hates this. He told the people of Israel, he hates when people do this. And here Jephthah thinks that he's doing a service to God by doing this, that this is what God wants. And wow, the Israelites have fallen far indeed from who God is. And this also brings to mind, because he makes a vow, right? He says, I vow I will do this. This is probably what Jesus has in mind when he says, do not make a vow, do not make an oath.
Let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Yep. And so anything else comes from the evil one.
Yeah.
So when Jesus says that line, that's probably a callback to what Jephthah did here. And as a warning, kind of say, don't make vows, especially
that you aren't sure you can keep.
Right, when you say don't cash a check that you can't keep.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's one thing if he's like, if you give me this, I will sacrifice, this firstborn, goat or sheep or something like this. But it's like, whatever comes out of my house, I'll sacrifice. It's like,
whoa.
You really think a sheep is going to come out of your house?
He's not thinking.
Your family dog, maybe?
Right, yeah. So it's unfortunate. So we see, and then eventually in chapter 12, we get the conflict with the tribe of Ephraim here. So they kind of come forward and say, hey, why didn't you call us out to help you fight?
Ephraim does that a couple times in this book.
Yeah,
and it's like
it tells you who they are.
It's like they have this big issue with not being called up to fight. And we're going to fight you because you didn't ask us to help fight. Right. Which
tells you the tribe of Ephraim does have the reputation of being kind of warlords. They're very warlike, so they're kind of always itching for a fight, which they become the primary tribe in the northern kingdom of Israel. That's, you'll see the prophets mention Ephraim, and they're referencing that tribe because they come primary.
Yeah, because I was kind of wondering that, because I hadn't caught that before reading Judges, but they do that a couple times, and it's like, okay, you're going to go to war because you weren't allowed to go to war.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
So it's sad. Jephthah, he only judges, this tells you too, that he only judges Israel 6 years. But we're not told that peace is given to the land. So Jephthah here, for the first time, the cycle has been broken. At the end of each judge, we've been told there's peace at the end of his reign.
No, there isn't.
No, there isn't. So things are just getting worse. And then finally, we get a few more minor judges, 3 minor judges. because we 1 and 2 and now 3. So it's kind of extrapolating here.
And then we get into Samson.
The final judge, he gets the most time given in the book of Judges, is Samson, the judge. And unfortunately, he's actually the worst judge. So what do you notice about Samson? What about his life?
Well, one thing I noticed is that the prophecy of his birth or whatever, and some of his life is very similar to John the Baptist, actually, because I actually have that in here, because his mother is told, "Behold, you are barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore be careful and drink no wine or strong drink and eat nothing unclean." And then you go to Luke chapter 1 and you get to Zechariah. Where did that go? "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. And he will not drink wine or strong drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even from his mother's womb." So there's kind of the idea that, the wife was barren. An angel came and said, "You're going to bear a son," and, he's basically going to be set apart for, something. Because this is the first judge. I think he's the only judge that actually we get he was set aside from birth for this task.
Yeah.
And so there's parallels kind of between Samson and John the Baptist, and John the Baptist is kind of like Samson
done right.
How he should have been done.
Yeah.
Because John the Baptist points to Jesus, where Samson gets kind of a big head and starts thinking, his strength comes from his hair and, all that. So anyway, there's parallels there.
Well, and then this also sets up too, because you'd said he's not supposed to drink strong wine. You're not to cut his hair. Put no razor to it. And don't do this. Well, Samson, what he'll do is he'll go and break each one of those things, and the final one's the hair. And so he has more than one wife. He wants the foreign women. He falls in love with a couple of them here. He also then, we're told he rips a lion into pieces. And then a week later, when he travels on the road, he sees bees have built a nest in the carcass, and there's honey. And he takes the honey, which is a no-no. You're not supposed to touch dead animals. So he's unclean now.
I mean, it's unclean anyway.
Right, it's disgusting.
It's actually unclean.
Yeah. And he takes it then, and chapter 14, verse 9, he scraped it into his hands and went on eating as he went. So you're just like, oh, man. And he went to his father and mother and gave some to them. And they ate. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of the lions. All right, so he's like passing on this uncleanliness, and it rhymes with what Eve and Adam did with the taking of the fruit and eating. Samson, I love, he sees the Philistines and says, I want to marry her. And his parents are like, why not get someone from the people of Israel? And he's like, no, I want her. Not knowing that this is actually God setting him up to, go to fight the Philistines.
Because then he's not so happy with his wife. And then he goes
out.
Off, and there's all this big
Samson
mess.
likes to find the women who sell him out.
The whole Samson and Delilah story makes no sense to me either. But so he he kills a bunch of Philistines, ends up with the jawbone of a donkey.
Yep. Quite a feat there.
Yeah, another interesting side point. Some people think Samson might have been the inspiration for Hercules or Heracles, depending on if you're Roman or Greek.
Right.
Because there's Hercules kills a lion and is really strong, and so you wonder if Samson isn't maybe some of the inspiration for that legend.
Yeah.
At least he might have been one of the figures, because most myths and legends actually come from real
basis
people.
In history. Yeah.
So anyway, that's just a side
point.
Well,
and I think I've told you, the Philistines come from
Greece.
Greece. They're probably settlers from Greece, at least a
so
tribe.
There might be a bit of a legend there that this really strong guy, and then he turned into the son of Zeus and
right. He got mythologized there.
Yeah.
So he brings. We told that he judges Israel 20 years. So he does kind of have 20. That's a long time though. 2 decades worth of time that he's judge. And of course, there's chapter 16 gets into the famous Samson and Delilah. And Delilah is goaded on by the Philistines, saying, "Hey, I think Samson has a crush on you. Maybe you should try to go get in his back pocket and." When the time is right, find out where his strength is, and we'll take care of it from there.
Yeah, and she does. He gives her an answer like 3 or 4 times here. And every time you'd think
he'd wisen up.
Yeah, and be like, I'm not going to,
Which probably tells you too that she might be getting him some alcohol, because he's not supposed to have wine.
That's true.
So she's kind of getting him, high up on something, and each time he gets a little closer to telling her, and eventually he does. Say, "If you cut my hair."
His answer isn't technically true either.
Right.
Because his strength, I mean, he thinks, okay, I've never cut my hair, and that's where my strength comes from. But his strength really comes from God.
Yeah.
The hair is just a symbol of that.
Yeah. It's a sign of it.
Yeah. So
once he forsakes the sign, God has, truly has abandoned him. And of course, then he gets captured. He gouges out his eyes. And then, they use him as a servant, pretty much.
Yeah,
and
entertainment.
And finally, that's kind of where his life ends up. So really, the story of the book of Judges ends in a total collapse. And Samson here is the prefigurement of where these judges are leading. Because he's sitting there, they prop him up against the temple, and he prays to God one last time, return to me my strength and let me avenge myself. He does, pushes the temple, and we're told 3,000 Philistines die that day.
Well, there's another parallel then between Samson and John the Baptist, because Samson kind of comes right before the period of the kings.
Right.
Whereas John the Baptist comes before the king.
Right.
Before Jesus comes.
That's a good point. And this, when we kind of know the period of this king Saul here, is this less than 20 years away from probably when Samson is. So we kind of get the end of it. Samson's dead. He judges Israel 20 years. We're still not really told about peace, though, at the end of it. So, unfortunately, we see how things have been going.
Then we get into 3 epilogues, essentially.
Yeah, so chapters 17 through 21. So far, the book has talked about, here's how bad the leaders are. The rest of the book goes into, here's how bad everyone else is, too. So it's not like the people are innocent going, what's wrong with our leaders? That the people are also engaged in this same sort of activity. So the first one is Micah and the Levite.
So Micah basically creates a household god, an idol, and gets a Levite who is supposed to be serving God in the tabernacle.
Yeah, private priest.
Serve as his private priest.
He's
to his household
privatizes religion is what he does. And this is a big no-no here, right? This is, you can't have your own private priest.
Yeah, this is kind of how far the priests have fallen.
Yeah. And we're told this line is given 4 times in chapters 17 through 21. But chapter 17, verse 6 is the first time it's said, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So when you're reading the first 5 verses, you're like, what in the world? And then you read, verse 6, okay, this is how bad things are then. And so he's made a private priest. He's like, which sounds good. He's like, oh, good, I don't need to worry about anything anymore in my life because he'll just take care of me. And then
he sells them out to the Danites.
The moment he gets a better offer from someone else, he's like, yeah, sure, I'll take that bet. And so chapter 18, verse 1, we get the same line again. There's no king in Israel. Everyone does what he thinks is right. And we're told of the tribe of Dan. And the tribe of Dan comes along, and they have a private army here, and they're looking for a place to settle down. They come across Micah and the Levite here, and they're like, hey, Levite, how about you come with us? Give us the gold, give us the silver. So they kind of pillage the guy here. And then they go off, and they find the town of Laish here. And in a tragic statement here, they pretty much kill everyone in the land. And these are peaceful people. They haven't done anything wrong. And the tribe of Dan decides to, make it their home village. And they end up calling it the city Dan. And so the tribe of Dan here becomes kind of synonymous for idolatry and unfaithfulness. And we see they're kind of, not a good tribe. This is probably why in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, that Dan is left out in the counting of the 12 tribes, because it's usually associated with idolatry. And so they don't get that kind of continuing inheritance.
Interesting.
And it fulfills the word that Jacob said to them, that Dan is like a serpent in the grass that will strike out at you. So these people here fulfill what Jacob said that the tribe of Dan was going to do. So it's kind of sad. And
the next story.
Yeah, the next story is the worst.
This is Sodom and Gomorrah
revisited
and made worse.
Yeah. Which, like I said, this final story says, hey, remember Sodom and Gomorrah? It's these people now, too. Like, the Israelites are just like Sodom and Gomorrah. If you remember what happened to that town, It's almost like the Book of Judges ends
with...
This is
like almost exactly the same.
And yeah, even to the point of, spending the night in the city square. Please don't spend the night in the city square.
And then the men come and are like, we want to have sex with your visitors.
Yep.
And they're like, no, here's my daughters. And this is all Lot back in Genesis.
Yep.
If you want to go back, if you don't remember that.
Yes.
But this one, they actually do push the concubine out, and the girl gets raped and killed. And then,
Then he takes her and splits her up into 12 pieces and then sends one piece of her to the 12 tribes. And it kind of, some people think maybe he even incited this, like he knew it was going to happen. And so it incites the 12 tribes to be like, what? What is this? And tragically, if you're thinking this is at the end of the lifetime of the judges, we're told at the end of chapter 18 there, that the people of Dan set up a carved image for themselves, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan that day. So it tells you that maybe Moses' grandson or great-grandson is involved with this. So this is really recent after the conquering of the land. And in this one, we're told that Phineas is still the high priest, that's Eleazar's son, which is Aaron's grandson. So this is really early on, unfortunately. So this causes them the other tribes, because of what has happened in the tribe of Benjamin, to go up to civil war.
Which is what almost happened at the end of the book of Joshua. They almost went up to civil war, and they're like, nope, we're not being, the end of Joshua was, no, we're not being idolatrous. This is just a sign of it's a sign between us, basically. And here they actually do go through with the war. Yeah. And basically kill all the Benjamites.
Yep. And once again, there's in chapter 20, verse 16 there, among all these were 700 chosen men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair and not miss, or the word is not sin, because that's what sin means. You're missing something. And the men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000. So it's 26,700 versus 400,000. And during the Civil War, eventually, after a couple of failed attempts by Judah and the rest of the tribes, they do conquer Benjamin and leave them only 600 left. And this causes, in chapter 21, for them to lament and cry out, because they're like, well, we're down to 11 tribes now, that God has removed one of the tribes from us. And this is sad, as part of the people of God is gone. And
they do the whole thing where they have to find wives for them, so that Benjamins aren't.
Because they don't want the tribe of Benjamin to go extinct. They want them to continue thriving, but they made a vow.
Once again, they made a vow.
Yep, they made vows saying, well, we're not going to give any of our daughters to these men. And so it's like, well, where are we going to get the women then for them to marry? And there's a couple of opportunities that they present that the tribe of Benjamin is they force 400 young women, virgins here, to go be their wives. And then the rest of the 200, they have them hide out in bushes, and when they see the women come out, they come and snag them and take them. And you're just like, whoa.
Yeah. Again, this isn't necessarily prescriptive. This isn't
descriptive.
A good thing necessarily. This is they're like trying to basically put a Band-Aid on a gushing wound.
Mm-hmm. And we're reminded of this at the end of the very last verse of the book of Judges. Says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So that kind of tells you this is not good.
Which this is also kind of again a warning to us again that if your worship and your of God is starting to be like, well, this is how I want to worship God, or this is what I want to do,
it's dangerous.
Be careful,
right?
Because God does have
So
ideas of how things should be done.
And if your life starts looking a lot like the world's, right? Consider what the Israelites looking a lot like the Canaanites, so much that they look like Sodom.
The Israelites they aren't the shining light on the hill they're supposed to be.
No, and that's the tragic thing, that God had said, if you will be my people, everyone around you is going to see, wow, look at their God.
So instead of the people around them starting to be like them, they started to be like all the people around them. They started coveting what was around them, and
they became just like them.
Yeah. And
in some ways, far worse, because they should have known better.
So anyway, the whole no king then sets up
Ruth, that there needs to be a king.
Ruth and to Samuel, which actually Ruth apparently was actually set after the Proverbs in the Hebrew way of setting things up.
Right.
Which I found it because that goes back to the Psalm 30 or the Proverbs 31 woman.
Right. So it kind of sets that up, and we read Proverbs 31, and there's the book of Ruth.
Yeah. So anyway,
here's the
that's
example
just,
of
but
that.
yeah, it works very well setting right after between Judges and 1 Samuel, because this takes place during the time of the Judges, and it leads up to the events in 1 Samuel.
Yeah, our Bibles, especially the Old Testament, they're set up roughly chronologically.
Yeah. Except for the prophets.
Right. Where the rest of the time, like your Latin or your Hebrew or your Greek Bibles, they set it up more topically. And so that's kind of how they would rearrange it. So it's always kind of fun when, we memorize our books of the Bible, which is fine. But when I had to go through seminary, I had to memorize them the Hebrew way. Mm-hmm. And so I had to get used to like how the books of the Bible were rearranged in the Old Testament and New Testament. So that's kind of, New Testament's pretty solid, but so the book of Ruth, anything that you kind of cherish and really beloved story. It's much more than that, of course, but anything that you just love that you note about the book of Ruth?
Well, I mean, Ruth and Boaz are actually very good characters compared to they're both very faithful, and Ruth leaves her country for her mother-in-law, and Boaz makes sure to take care of his, I don't know how, Naomi's his cousin or something. That's how it is. Anyway, so after you get all of what's been going on, and all the way up through now, basically, here's actually some decent people. Yeah. And even Boaz does where he greets his workers, "The Lord be with you," or whatever.
And they say, "The Lord bless you."
Yeah. And so it is just kind of a nice
wholesome tale
break from it's like, okay, there are still people who are faithful.
A remnant.
Yeah, the remnant. The remnant language is very big in here, actually.
Yeah. So you began with a famine in the place where there should be food, Bethlehem. And so, what was his name? Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their two sons Mahlon and Chilion, they travel to Moab, and they lived there. And shockingly, the two sons marry Moabite women, which is a big no-no. But here they do, and maybe they pay the penalty for that by dying. That could be a reason. So the two boys die. Elimelech dies, and it just leaves Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth. And
Orpah goes back to
her
family,
back to her country.
Ruth doesn't want to.
All right, she clings to him, clings to her. And I love chapter 1, verse 5 there. There's her sons die, and so the woman, she's not even named anymore, was left without her two sons and her husband. Now, I love this because the word for son here is actually the word for like little boy. And you're like, these are big men here. So she's left without her boys and her husband. But that word is actually only used one other time in the book, and that's when Obed is born. And so it's kind of setting up this reversal.
Obed is like
she's the new boy.
This is a reversal of all of her circumstances.
Yeah. So that word is actually a word pun for Obed later in the narrative at the end of the story. So Ruth clings to her mother-in-law Naomi, and they decide there's nothing for me here, so let's go back to Israel, to Bethlehem. And they come back, and everyone's shocked to see her. And isn't this Naomi? And she said, no, don't even call me that anymore. Call me Mara.
Which is bitter.
Bitter, which is also where we get the word for Mary. So the word Mary means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty, which kind of mirrors Mary's song, the Magnificat, when she sent the hungry, filled up the hungry, and sent the rich empty away. That's kind of a parallel to what Naomi, Mary of the Old Testament, says here. So call me Mara. And Ruth is with her, and they hang out at the beginning of the barley harvest, we're told. And then, of course, she goes, and there's a lot. God is not really mentioned in this book either, but it's almost like it just so happened that this occurred. And it's and
all these perfect circumstances that just sort of happen. Ruth happens to go to the field of Boaz, who happens to be their kinsman redeemer, and
I love it.
She catches his eye, and it all just works out.
Yeah. So Boaz allows her to reap in her fields, and it kind of, if you remember, the time of the book of Judges is not a good time, and so he's like, stay with these women, don't linger back because I don't want you to get assaulted or hurt in the fields if you're away from everyone. So stay close by to where you're going to be protected and watched over. So Boaz takes responsibility for her, who, if you remember, is a Moabite still. So he shows her an extreme act of loyalty and love, even though they're supposed to be kind of enemies here. And then, of course, he gives her extra food on the way back, saying, take all this, take it back to Naomi, because he hears about her, because he researches her a little bit and finds out what she's done. And she goes back to Naomi and says, hey, look at the kindness, it's Boaz. And she's like, oh,
Boaz.
It's Boaz. How exciting. And sets that up. And hey, how about, and then Ruth and Naomi once again start plotting like they did in chapter 2 about, hey, how about you go meet him at night? He's going to be at the threshing floor tonight, and, ask him if you'll be redeemed. That's pretty much a marriage proposal. Will you marry me? And so she does go, uncovers his feet, and people are wondering why. There might be some cultural thing with that. We're not exactly sure. Some people even try to test Ruth's character there. But at some point, maybe it's just the point that his feet would get cold and he'd wake up like, why are my feet uncovered? And all of a sudden like, who are you? And so sees her there and talks to her, and the plan is, hey, would you redeem our family? Because now that there's no man in the family, their inheritance will be soon lost. They won't have anything to pass on to the next generation, and their name will be blotted out.
The idea is like if your brother dies, the next brother is supposed to take the wife and have children, basically, that would take the brother's name.
Yep.
So this is essentially what's happening here, but there's no brother. This is like the next closest relative, basically.
Yeah.
Well, second closest as we find out, but... And
this becomes actually the idea of a kinsman redeemer. This is the first time that this idea is really fleshed out in Scripture. And we come to find out that God later on, especially will talk about himself as the redeemer, the one who's going to redeem his people. And so you start to wonder in the Old Testament, like, how is God, the one who is way over there, going to be our next of kin? And of course, the New Testament opens with Jesus taking on our flesh.
Well, of course, this is all taking place in Bethlehem.
Right, the place where Jesus was born. So isn't that kind of hint, hint, wink, wink? So Boaz, though, there's a problem. There's someone who's closer in relation. And he's the one who technically should redeem you before I can. And so you're kind of like, oh no, you're like, this is such a nice setup, but now we have a problem. It's kind of like your perfect Hallmark movie kind of situation here. So they kind of have the plan. He's going to go to the gate. So Boaz goes and he sits down with the elders. And it just so happens that Redeemer comes into town that day too. And he stops him, pulls him to the side and says, hey, here's the situation. And at first he's like, yeah, I'll do it. And you're like, oh no, because you kind of fall in love with Boaz at this point. But then Boaz kind of plays the trump card and says, well, if you do, you're going to have to marry a Moabite and, fulfill children. And he's like, nope, because I don't want to put my inheritance at risk.
Isn't there an implication that maybe this guy doesn't have kids of his own yet or something? Yeah. So this would be his firstborn too, or I don't know.
Right, so then his inheritance would be up, which tells you that Boaz is also putting himself on the line too. Like how Jesus puts everything that is his on the line for us. Why would he do it for an enemy? Well, Jesus does, because he loves his enemy. So this is what Jesus does for us too. So Boaz is a type of Christ in that way. So Boaz then, they take the sandal off, and here's my shoe. It's yours to redeem. Have at it. And he's like, okay. And so he does. And then the elders at the gate who witnessed this say, yup, it's going to happen. It's kind of like signing the contract. May the Lord, I love this. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. I love that line. So have lots of kids. And build up the next tribe, which, talk about this is how Jesus will come into play here. Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, which brings that Old Testament account into mind too, who's also in the line of Jesus. It's because the Lord will give you by this young woman. So Boaz does marry Ruth, and we're told that she bears him a son. So all the tragedy in the first chapter is undone. The woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a store of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. So this is kind of like Naomi adopts Obed. So this is Naomi's child. It's not Ruth and Boaz. This is Naomi's child. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." You can think of a son has been born to us. Kind of the same idea of Redeemer. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So we get the prefigurement of great King David here. And it sets the stage for 1st and 2nd Samuel when we get to those in the Old Testament. So, and then a genealogy, how we get from, Perez to David. And it kind of traces the line. So once again, we're caught up with, that's right, this whole Old Testament story is about how we get to Jesus and how we follow that line. So any final thoughts that you have about the book of Ruth that sticks out or stands out to you?
I think we're good.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, what a pleasure it is, even when we read these tough, hard accounts in the book of Judges, we remember that here's a God who still works with the sin of his people, will bring them to justice through it, but yet is willing to work through them in order to bring about Christ and our salvation. And we see even in the book of Hebrews chapter 11 that Samson is one of the people of faith. So when you read Samson in the Old Testament, remember, how is Samson saved? By faith.
Because he does have faith in the end.
He does, and it's restored to him. So thanks be to God. So good. Well, how about close with a word of prayer and then give a blessing. Let us pray. Father in heaven, we give you thanks that despite our sin and our falling, that you have restored us through your Son, Jesus, that you have worked great faithfulness on account of your name, on account of your promises. Lord, turn our hearts, that they may not be so corrupt and willing to follow after idols, but Lord, that we may hold to you, our one true God, and the gifts that you give through Jesus Christ our Lord. In his name we pray. Amen. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. Amen.